So, David, in your book, you wrote that example is, in many ways, the best leader. Why do you say that?
I think we're imitative creatures, and that you can read a rule, and I make rules like we all make New Year's resolutions, but they don't really keep because they're too abstract. But we can all be like somebody, and so if you're around somebody who you really admire, you find yourself automatically copying them. And that starts from a phenomenally early age. Somebody did a study of babies when they were 39 minutes old. And he leaned over little babies and he wagged his tongue at the babies. And the babies don't know what a face is or what another person is, but they wag their tongue back. And so they imitate. And so we're born imitating. We imitate our parents, and we imitate our friends, then we imitate the people we admire. So I do think seeing exemplars is basically one of the best ways to become a better person, just copying people you admire.
Wow, absolutely. And one of the things that we say on this show and in general in the Navy is that it's so important to lead by example. So great to hear that scientific foundation to it.
Yeah, if I get just one more thing, I had a guy who was a veterinarian in Oregon send me a note, and I was saying how hard it is to teach character in the classroom. And the note he sent was, never forget what a wise person says is the least of that which they give. What gets learned from is their small gestures, their graciousness, their attitude. And then he had a sentence I remember, never forget the message of the person. So the way we communicate is the way we are, and the message is the person, the way we actually are around other people.
The message is the person. That's fantastic. And another thing about leaders, too, that you touch on is that leaders have a tremendous responsibility and can potentially do more harm than they have the capacity for good in some situations. Could you explain that a little more?
Sure. In my day job, I'm a political journalist, so I go into the White House a lot, and I sit, and I've done this since Ronald Reagan was president, so for a long time, and so I sit in the same rooms, with different administrations, and they're so very different one from another, and it all depends on what the person at the top is like. It's probably true of a commander of a ship. It's certainly true of a White House or an organization, that the person at the top sends little signals without even thinking about it. Does the person speak first in meetings, or do they let other people speak first? Do they demand total honesty, or do they not? One of my heroes is a guy named George Shultz, who was a Marine and then went on to become Secretary of State and Secretary of a lot of different Treasury, a lot of different jobs. And one of the things he did in one of his early jobs, this was back when they had regular old snail mail, he took postage stamps and he put it in bowls around the office. And he said, if you're going to send a personal letter, use a postage stamp. Don't use a government stamp. And that sent a little message that we're going to be really honest here. We're going to play by the rules. And those little ways of communicating just permeate a whole organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that you talk about that I talked to a few other authors recently about is forgiveness, and how that can be important in an organization. And you really emphasize in your book the importance of forgiveness. Could you explain how to do that, what it is that's so important about that?
Yeah. Well, I do think it can really strengthen a relationship if one person is wronged and the other person has not, but then forgives. And the key thing about forgiveness is you don't pretend the bad thing never happened. You just decide that bad thing is not to be the barrier to relationship. And so then Martin Luther King was the genius at this. He said, the person doing the forgiveness sometimes has to make the first move. And to say, I'm going to forgive you, or go in with a posture to welcome the penance. And then the person who did the wrong has to say, this one's on me. I made a mistake. I apologize. And then some penance, some actual thing I'm going to do to make it right. But King's point was it's tough forgiveness. It's not just, oh, I'm sorry, fine. Well, we acknowledge what had happened, and we don't say it didn't happen, but we're still going to have a relationship because of it.
Yeah, and there you talk about a word that kind of could seem old-fashioned. You say penance, and in your book you talk a lot about language and modernizing this kind of language that we use historically to describe topics of character, like your book. And one of them is sin, too. Could you explain this modernization of language, and especially as it pertains to sin?
Yeah, we've sort of dropped a lot of these words. Now we use the word sin mostly in the connection of fatty desserts, sort of not moral thing. It's like obesity. And I don't think you can understand your own character unless you have these words. Like sin, to me, the best definition of sin is disordered love. And so we all love a lot of things, and we all know some loves are higher than some others. And so we should all love honesty more than we love money. And if you lie in order to get money, that's putting your love of money in above your love of honesty. Or if somebody gives you a secret, and then you blab it at a dinner party, you're putting your love of popularity above your love of friendship. And that's something we do all the time. And that's what sin is. It's getting your loves out of order. And we've sort of dropped it because it seems, we don't want to admit that we're broken, that there's just some screw up in our nature. We should just, we all want to be good. Everybody I've ever met wants to be good. We're not all good. And that's because we put self above other things. Sometimes we advantage ourselves and disadvantage our community, when we all know we should really be advantaging our community and disadvantaging ourselves. We're just made that way. And if you don't have a language to say, we're kind of screwed up in the way we're made, we've got some bugs in the system, then you really don't have a language to identify your own sin, to work on your own sin, to get better, to redeem sin, to enjoy grace. So all these words that are the ancient words for character development, we've sort of tossed them out because they seem too religious or too judgmental or too something.
Yeah, when you break it down into that really specific definition of disordered love, it suddenly becomes so universal. Another author who I just interviewed before you, and is kind of an interesting contrast, is Robert Greene. He wrote the 48 Laws of Power. Do you know him?
Of course, I've read his books.
Yeah. And so, with Robert, he would say, these books, they don't take a moral stand or anything. But when I interviewed Robert, we actually talked about these disordered loves. We talked about getting caught up in alcohol, pornography, drugs, these things that a person can really slip into. But in that sort of language, we would never call it sin, but it's definitely a disordered love. It's definitely something that people put ahead of other things that are going to be more important in life. So really refreshing.
I was on TV before the book came out talking about sin in my book, and I got a call from a friend of mine who's an editor at a different publishing house, and he said, I love the way you talk about your book, but I wouldn't use the word sin. It's such a downer. Use the word insensitive. And I said, insensitive is not sin. And so one of my basic diagnoses, and frankly one of my missions in life, is I believe our culture is over-politicized and under-moralized. We talk too much about politics, but not enough about the things that I think really matter. How good is our character? How good are our relationships? Are we trusted? Are we honest? And what does forgiveness look like? How do you take a moment of suffering and turn it into something useful? And so maybe in the Navy or in the military, people do talk about these things, but in large parts of the culture, they don't talk about it at all, and it's a problem.
One thing we definitely talk about is pride. We talk about having a pride in ourselves, a pride in our community, a pride in the Navy. Could you explain what you share in the book about pride and how it can be central to so many shortcomings?
Yeah, well, I think there are two kinds of pride. One is pride in something done well. And when we're kids, we love to get our mom and dad to be proud of us. And we do a lot of good things in order for them to be proud of us. And that's a perfectly good form of pride. The bad form of pride, I'd say, is self-deceptiveness. And so humility is, to me, the most important virtue, even more important than courage. And humility is radical honesty from a position of other-centeredness. That is to say, I can step outside myself, and I can see where I'm strong, and I can see where I'm weak. I'm very accurate about myself. Abraham Lincoln was very humble, and he knew where his weaknesses is. But that doesn't mean he thought he was dirt. He knew where he was really strong. He was just honest. And so, to me, pride is the opposite of that. Pride is self-deception. It's the inability to see where you're weak. It's the inability to see where you're strong. It's the insistence that you are really great and everyone should treat you as if you're great. And so one of the things about pride is it makes you so unhappy because no one is ever quite treating you as great as you think you deserve. And so you're upset about that, or you're competitive, or pride is very fragile. You think you're great, you've puffed up this idea of yourself, and then somebody pokes you and suddenly you collapse and get angry. And so pride is a form of self-deception. And a humble person is just stable, and it's like when they make an argument in a meeting, they're not personally at stake. The argument could be good, the argument could be bad, I have good ideas, I have bad ideas, but when you're proud, you're always at stake, and you get hurt when your argument gets dissed.
Yeah, so now in the world that we have where Instagram and all these platforms, people are constantly obsessed with with their reputation. And you touched on it in the last chapter too, of the birth of the personal brand and Broadway Joe and all that. Now everyone is their own personal brand. How can people navigate that desire for a good reputation while still maintaining character?
Yeah. Well, to me, one of the dangers of Instagram is it makes you think your life is just a series of experiences. So, can I post this? Can I post that? Can I post that? And so life just turns into like a bucket list. I did these 10 things today, and they were all very photogenic, rather than an accumulating flow of accomplishment. And sometimes if you're doing something really important that's going to last, whether it's in military service or in writing, there's nothing really to take a picture of because you got to work through a lot of stuff to achieve something real. And so life should be one constant flow of a commitment and not just a series of moments. And the other thing is we're always now aware of who's liking us and who's not. And with my newspaper column, every column is either reaches the top of the most read or it doesn't, or it's down the list. And I know intellectually that it doesn't, like sometimes my best columns are not at the top. Sometimes my worst columns are at the top. They just happen to be popular, and that's different. But it's very hard for me to realize that in my person. When the column doesn't do anything, I get hurt inside and I want to write something. I want to appeal to the masses, so I'll do something popular. And so these likes and dislikes and how many people retweeted my tweet, it's super addictive in a way we just have to be conscious of. And I found the only way I can really control that appetite to be popular is by shutting it off and by not paying attention to the likes. I've blocked all my responses to Twitter just because I don't need that much feedback about what people think of me. Right. I get it face to face.
Right. Yeah, and something else too that you touched on is that so much of life happens in gray areas and things, and to break people down into saying, oh, these people like me and these people don't. They're probably people who like something about us and maybe don't like other things, and there's no need to get hung up on all of that anyway.
Yeah, I have friends, when I think about it, I don't really like them, but they're my friends. They've been my friends all my life, and I'm fiercely loyal to them. I'll stick by them. I don't know why they're my friends, but somehow an attachment formed, and we're friends. Yeah,
it's amazing how that can happen. At the end of the book, you talked about how a few of the characters throughout had journaled, while a few hadn't. I wondered if you suggest any specific habits, maybe a meditation practice or journaling or a morning routine or anything like that for building character.
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. I used to not believe in journaling because I thought just writing out your own things, because I thought it might be self-indulgent. But I think I've changed my mind. And whenever I meet somebody who's really self-aware, they journal. They write things just to themselves. To write only for yourself is a very honest thing. It's very hard. It forces you into some degree of honesty. So I'd say that's a very important thing. Another important thing is moments of solitude. Going out, maybe at sea, but certainly the desert. There's something about the desert that is just, it gets you in a different frame of time. Time moves very slowly in the desert. And so you're really forced to think about yourself, those periods of solitude. And then, there are other things. To me, it's just shifting a mindset from to a commitment mindset. What am I going to give myself away to? And thinking like, in my view, my next book is really, we all make 4 big commitments. Most of us do, to a vocation, to our career, to a family, to a community, and to a philosophy or faith. And you think, how am I making on these big commitments in my life? How am I choosing and how am I executing on the choice I already made? Wow.
Well, I'll look forward to that one. David, before I ask my last question, where can people find you online?
Well, I do tweet under the name NYT Brooks, I think. I don't even know my Twitter handle. And so the best place to know what's going on in my brain at any moment is going to the New York Times website, Google New York Times David Brooks, and a list of my columns. I have to write a column every 3 days. And so whatever I'm thinking at that moment, that's where I am.
Excellent. David, my final question is, how would you tell a leader to go about building a culture of people of character?
Yeah. Well, first, I have a couple of military people in the book, and I apologize. They're all Army, not Navy. So I picked obviously inferior examples like George Marshall and Dwight Eisenhower. But the way I'd say it is create a thick organization. That some organizations are thick and some are thin. Some you pass through, and you are not really changed by them. But some are thick. You just know people are members of that organization. If you're in the Navy, I'm going to know you're going to be 50 or 60 years old, but I'll be able to tell by the certain way you talk, a certain way you organize your life. I can tell that you were formed by that organization. So what makes an organization thick? It has a strong sense of purpose. It usually involves close quarters where people are face-to-face observing each other in a close sense. It often has a sacred origin story. It has shared ritual. It has music. It has a sense of meeting face-to-face over a table. It often has a sense of you're spending the nights together at a retreat center or somewhere, so you see each other before breakfast and after dinner when you really got your hair down. And so it's got all these things. And what I find, the military is an obvious example of this, but even a private company, people don't want to work for an organization or go to a college that's just like all the others. They want something that'll grab their whole person and give them a sense of purpose and meaning. They want it to be thick. And you meet a guy who went to Morehouse College, you know he's a Morehouse man. And so the organizations should not be afraid to just be themselves. They can hate you, they can love you, but you will be distinct. And that's what leaders can do. They can really create thick organizations where people bring their whole selves to the thing.
Wow, that's something to aspire to. David, thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure, and thanks for what you do.